Shabbat Shalom.
This meeting is being recorded.
Shabbat Shalom, Baruch Hashem. This week's parasha, I believe, Metzorah and Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 14. You know, it starts off, I'm in the crown. I don't know what translation everybody else has, but it's another Vayomer. And the Most High spoke to Moshe, saying, this is the law of one with Tzara'at on the day of his purification. He shall be brought to the priest, to the Kohen. The priest shall go outside the camp. The priest shall look, and if he notices that the Tzara'at plague is healed from the one afflicted with Tzara'at, the priest shall order him to take from the one being purified, and then it keeps on going on what he orders and what happens. Now, popularly taught in rabbinical Judaism that we're talking about skin disease here. Now, one thing that's been much discussed among Orthodox rabbis in Israel and even among Kohanim is because we're also taught implicitly in some of the same areas that we're in that sin lives and hides in the skin. How can it be taught that it's a ritualistic area dealing with skin disease? And why is it set within a framework of clean and unclean? And so what it really comes down to is there's a penchant about describing things that are of a spiritual nature as ritualistic. And because that was done like that, whether you're in Christianity, whether you're in Buddhism or many others, because they accept those translations, they come away with an ideal, a teaching that's lacking in saying this is all about what's ritualized. And this is a ritual, that's a ritual. Well, if you're going to call the sequence of what's been taught for somebody to do a ritual, what are you going to say about your daily commute to work? What are you going to say about your daily affairs in the way that you get up in the morning and you take care of your personal effects, you're showering? What are you going to say about your sequence of the way you choose how you get dressed? Are you going to call it all a ritual? In the writing of the New Testament in the area of Acts, Shaul, the most learned man in teachings of his day, said that it became his tradition, not ritual, his tradition to teach in the temple on Shabbats. And he didn't say it became his habit, he said it became his tradition. Different verbiage may be akin to each other in similitude or basic definition. This tradition was born out of a habit. Well, being Torah observant and keeping the Shabbats is born out of a habit. So does Torah observance become therefore our tradition? Does keeping the Pesach become our tradition because we habitually do so? We keep it going. Frankie, are you okay?
Yes, it's the wind. The wind is blowing really hard. It's knocking stuff over.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering who your invisible companion was.
Oh, it's just
Moving
the
your
wind. You
arm?
see? No, it's blowing really hard.
Okay. Well, being inside, I'm not really feeling that right now. It does make me rather curious. Well, wind is blowing at 20 knots or 20 miles an hour. That makes it pretty interesting. You probably would really feel that if you were driving.
Yes, you can feel the car moving.
20
That's
miles
why
an hour. Well, it must feel pretty good to you. It gives a distinct impression, though, of you're doing a little bit of a dance where you're sitting. I thought perhaps a whole lesson was motivating you to get closer to the Most High. You just couldn't contain yourself.
I guess in a way it is. I was like, the wind is really up out here. Yes.
Well, maybe you can make sense of his voice if you block it out during the wind. So, from seeing everything this way, it makes me wonder why they've chosen to say it's ritualized rather than spiritual in dealing with these skin problems. And it is the code who decides what is clean and unclean. And even though they say it's something to do with skin disease, they don't mention anything of any kind of healing or being healthy, nothing in terms of medicine and a value or substance of medical terms, even of the day.
Mhm.
And even though everybody is so quick because of in the Brit Hadashah in his writings to go to Yaakov, to James, where they talk about righteous men coming together and praying and anointing with oil, there's no mention of any anointing or oil here. There's no mention of righteous men coming together in prayer. The whole emphasis is on discovering what is clean and unclean. The order of the Kohen, the priest. And so, as people attempt to read this more than just a superficial way, it can easily leave you with more questions than you had before. And mostly, there's an association with uncleanness itself having an association with skin diseases, sexually related events, okay, with uncleanness having a variety of associations, even with death, with childbirth, okay, even with contact and the worship of uh, different gods, deities, even alien gods. Alien being one who has no citizenship with you, with the people, not extraterrestrial. So we have a lot of different instances here. Michael, I'll probably in the next day or two send you a lot of these references, and if anybody's interested, you can pass it on to them.
Okay.
There's a lot of different associations, a lot of different directions it takes us into. But the biggest issue is the association there with clean and unclean and the spiritual value placed there to where he necessitates using a Cohen and the authority that he gives a Cohen to declare something clean and unclean. Okay, we don't have a lot of association all throughout Scripture with the Cohen dealing with disease. But here, they're intricately involved. So it begs the question, what's different about the skin disease area with Sabbath and Torah that bring the Cohen in for it to be the clean or unclean? And so we would have to discuss the references and study the Hebrew words involved to get a good direction. And so the direction that it takes you has got to be spiritual first for the Cohen to get involved with what is clean and unclean. And because the Cohen has the last say on what is clean and unclean, what he pronounces. And then we have to look at the intricacy of exactly what the Most High said and what direction he's going to be taking things governing this. If it's only dealing with skin disease, why is the Cohen getting involved? If it's dealing with more than skin disease and it's spiritual, even more than ritual in nature, well then, how are we going to get the gist of it in every way if we're going to do this even today as it was done in yesteryear? Can we really afford to make the statement that it's only a ritualized idea of what's declared clean and unclean? And so the Most High has actually got, I believe, genuinely, he's got some implicit teaching here that a lot of people are not really taking a look at. If clean and unclean is only a ritual, what value does that have with skin disease? If it's spiritual, what is really being taught and what kind of spiritual aspect of things is being taught and shown here with skin disease? So, with this in mind, what can, oh, forgive me, it was a good meal. What can really be said between chapter 14 and onward these terms? The only other thing that really comes out here is the application of the end result of clean and unclean, different offerings, and how they use the offerings in different ways. The sprinkling of blood on the Sara'ed itself for the Metzorah. And that could not be just very ritual, it would have to be spiritual. And so there's a lot that's not explained in an easy black and white language, and it renders us having to go back again to the Hebrew. And for what is said, how do we make the determination when we're seeing something spiritual? Why would something spiritual have to be determined clean and unclean? And if it was ritual, what would be the purpose fulfilled and using a ritualized methodology, clean and unclean, with our people? What place does it really have in Torah? Nobody wants to venture forth anything, huh? Okay.
If it was according to the ritualist, if it was according to ritualism, you had to be clean in order to even come in, and prevent, or to come in and bring your to even bring your sacrifice. You had to be clean.
This is true. If the owner of the offering was not in a clean state, he could not present his offering to the Cohen.
And
I
it's not
think
like
it's the Kohen being called in to see if it's a physical manifestation of a spiritual condition.
Anyone else? Everybody seems to have a very opinion based on the idea clean and unclean is vague. And the truth of it is, the Most High says in various places, you've got to let people know when you're clean and unclean. You call it, he says clean and unclean has a spiritual value, and yet that spiritual value is not shown in concise terms. And so, because of the way that it's portrayed, it really leaves room for a little speculation. Are you coming to the temple? Or are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And if so, then to what avail? No, I personally don't want somebody to be throwing blood on me and telling me in a declaration I'm clean versus not clean. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what each one is. What is the basis of clean and unclean? That's not taught in open circles. What is the spiritual aspect of being clean?
Be pure, wouldn't it?
But how does that explain anything? Clean and unclean, pure and impure? That really doesn't provide a basis for explanation or definition, whether it's spiritual or ritual. And what does it accomplish? What does it fulfill? What does it do? And so there's not a lot in this area that you can openly discuss and get anywhere with it without people being left with more questions, unless, of course, you're willing to delve into a deeper study to understand the part that the Cohen must play and why, having just been a free people from the Exodus within this 40-year time frame, they didn't know about it at the time, you have got a variety of issues at hand. You really do. And there's not much mention in the way it can be transferred. There's not much mention in the way you deal with it while you have it. There's not much mention in what you do when it's gone. So we don't have a lot to relate to here in and of itself throughout this entire parashot. Okay. It goes into a lot of detail, different sections and subsections of it. Okay. Why are we going to do as we do with Cohen and Cohen Hagal and Prophet Naveems with a mentioning of the ear, thumb, and toe when the Most High has his Kohanim annoy each other, right? Okay, it's just ear, thumb, and toe in 3 places. Then where are we going with this? What are we going to do with it? So we have a strong case for study, and the only way right now that most people would study well, that they don't do a study to much area, is because every place we go to study, troublesome areas are not used to explain this area. The troublesome areas are used to distinguish the separateness of this area of study from other areas. Thus, it has its own parashot, similar to the other one. Now, the procedures being involved there are odd from modern day points of view, but necessary based on the fact that it's in Torah, teaching, instruction, direction. Now, got an early Christian teacher, Philo, who makes statements that is signified voluntary depravity. Now, because of that verbiage, I would ask, what's the difference between voluntary depravity and involuntary depravity? Why would they find it necessary to say the depravity had anything to do with whether it was voluntary or not? If you're caught up in an addiction, you may be voluntarily doing things, but you don't have any control over it because it's addictive behavior. Even when we read it in Hebrew, we're really thrashing about, attempting to find a linguistic foreplay involved that might lead us in the direction of answers. And most teachers want to find a particular area of interest in this whole area of parashot study, so they can make the focus of a lesson only on that. And then when they're finished, they say, "Yeah, we covered that parashot, but you may have only covered a small part of it and emphasized it." We all do that, but in this area, it makes me wonder, why would they choose that? Okay. In rabbinic sources, even from the area of Mishnah and Talmud, they base it on, Hukim, Mishpatim, and other mixtures, Jadnas. They mention why it seems like they got to go beyond reason. There's so many people in the past ages that have bothered to make comment here. When you put it all together, it doesn't give you a solid direction to go in, even in attempting to look at what the sages wrote on it. Which really, they're just commentators. And so,
could it be that it was more specific for the Kohen Hagadol or the Kohen?
and by design, the one thing that does show strong evidence is the necessary involvement of the Kohanim in each instance, in each case.
Because you've stated before that the Kohen, when the man of the house brings his offering, the Kohen pretty much knows as he looks at him coming up whether he's of right standing or not. And that, and just in that alone, I would have to assume, because I've never experienced it, but that there would also be a designation of clean or unclean, possibly.
But you see, even in this dialogue that we're having, it doesn't really take us anywhere for resolution and understanding. Okay?
Mhm.
It's like somebody with eggs in a frying pan and throwing it up over and over, but we're not getting anything in resolution here. You know, you got other of the commentators and sages that talk about these things are to establish a lowly class of people. Well, we're the most high people. So are we going to be talking about a lowly class of people within the most high nation? You know, there's a lot that they say, but in order for me to teach this openly, I've got to breach areas I haven't taught people before. And so then we're going to have to backtrack in other tangents trying to explain why I'm teaching on such a premise when they haven't had anything established in the premise prior to this. So, conjunctively, if we only teach part at a time, we'd have to teach it on a yearly basis, and it might take 15 years to teach the whole thing and doing it in small, broken segments. Okay? So, what is clean and unclean and Lashon Hora and somebody bearing gossip and evil tales having to do with a plague of skin disease that makes you unclean? Except somebody's conjecture skin disease at different times is evidence of a shortcoming someplace in their behavior and their lifestyle, even within Torah observance.
Sure.
But we don't have enough scriptural evidence to say, okay, let's go with that. You know, they have another one, whoever slanders his neighbor in secret, him will I destroy. Okay? As meat. Okay? There's just, they shall be the law for him who brings up an evil name on someone. Okay? We've got just we got a lot of random statements. The only way they're connected is their behavior that they're involved with at the time that the Sara'et or the Metzora causes the affliction of the skin problem. And so people use logic to put it this, well, you were doing this at the time that this came upon you where you're unclean. You need to repent of thinking this way and become clean again so we can get on with things. But we don't have that premise that is real strong here for this. And so they finally get to a point in teaching skin disease results from idol worship, chastity, bloodshed, profaning of the divine name, blasphemy of the divine name, robbing the public, the dignity which one has no right, overweening pride, evil speech, evil eye. Okay? These are all different things that cause contribute to or supposedly. But we don't have a basis for this in scripture anywhere. We have associations with it, okay? But the only real tie to it all is the way that the Most High commands the Kohanim to intervene and to pronounce something clean or unclean, where he gives them insight to what person is that spiritually, is it connected to the behavior. But people at large who don't have the direction given by the Most High for this, whenever they read this area, they have to accept it on face value and depart it because they don't really understand it. Okay. And the prophet Yeshayahu Isaiah, the daughters of Zion are haughty, prideful, and walk with stretched forth necks and googling eyes. Okay. Therefore, Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh smites with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion. Okay. For bloodshed and the experience of Jeroboam, let it fall upon the head of Jeroboam and upon all of his father's house, and let there not fail from Jeroboam one that has an issue or that is a leper. Again, there's nothing definitive, no premise to support the Tzada'ed and Mazor we're talking about, but what they are actually doing within a context is establishing it is not medical skin disease. These are spiritual problems. But they won't speak openly in regarding it as a spiritual problem. They keep it vague. Every person who attempts to teach, every person who attempts to interpret, they won't really teach openly. They won't really speak openly on how it's spiritual. And being spiritual is going to have this effect or another effect. And they don't really have a good means of explaining the effects it has on a person's spiritual growth or why. So we're left with different expressions, different examples, and how it supposedly relates to a person's spiritual standing and growth. Where you at, Frankie? Hannah?
I came inside.
You guys don't women's knowledge to contribute? Huh?
I couldn't hear you. It went out. Can you repeat yourself, please?
I said, you guys don't have anything that comes to you with that special woman's knowledge that comes to women?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Oh, well, if it comes from someplace else around the body rather than top of the head, be sure and let us know that too. So it talks about it a lot, does not define it medically or spiritually, but it gives us all the examples of what's happening with it among different people. And it gives us this same pondering and mystique to try to deal with it one way or the other. Okay. Another one said that the disease comes from 11 sins. Okay. Cursing the divine name, immorality, bloodshed, ascribing to another a fault that is not in him, haughtiness, okay, encroaching upon other people's domains, a lying tongue for theft, swearing falsely, profanation in the name of heaven, and idolatry. You know, there's a lot spoken, but nothing with any divinity. And so for us to get into it requires a knowledge of Hebrew and Arabic. It requires an understanding of the difference between primary definition and other definitions of a word. There is a need to really look at behavior, and even in Torah observance. Are you being rude in your Torah observance? Is anybody suffering anything because of Lashon Hara? Does anybody have an evil eye? Okay. Um, this is an area that you can attack a person's name, integrity, reputation, even the substance of their body. But you don't really have those answers that we're normally looking for. Okay. Now, Cohen also has the option of telling a person to do self-examination and turn from their evil ways. What evil way? What are you doing that the Most High doesn't value? What's going to get you into a problem area? What's going to make people look at you bad? Okay? And then it comes back to the gossip again. Okay? So, do we see much Sara'at and Metzora actually within the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years? At the time that this was written, they were using things that were spiritual from the Most High to a much greater degree than anybody wants to live it today. There's just a lot there. So much there.
I have a question, Rob.
Yes.
In chapter 15, it talks about if you have an issue from your flesh. I understand that to be a discharge from your flesh, like we would see with an infection. But my question is, if we just get a simple skin wound and it bleeds and then it stops, does that make us unclean? Because we had an issue from our flesh.
That by itself does not make you unclean.
Okay.
But if you have serous fluid, you have pus, you have other evidence of the infection, without you being sinful, you could possibly be declared unclean, okay, until that has been eliminated.
Okay.
But that would be primarily because nobody today in rabbinical Judaism wants to go out on a limb and define Sarat Mitzvah to determine what it really is and how it's manifesting from something spiritual to something physical. Nobody wants to go out on a limb and be the one to say one thing or another.
What if it's both?
Okay.
What if it's both,
Well,
Rabbi?
again, let me be repetitious here, my friend. Who's going to decide what authority it takes to determine this when it's not revealed to us in Scripture in a determining way? We have associations, we have potential relationships from one thing to another. Okay.
But like in the case of leprosy, we have an instance when I want to say it was Miriam and Aaron were talking about Moshe, and Miriam.
Well, it's interpreted that it was leprosy. All it says is the skin was turned white. Now, have you ever seen any examples of leprosy, either the infectious kind or the uninfectious kind, that turns somebody's skin white?
No.
It turns in a few colors, but not white. And so I guess let me say it this way. Okay. That you would have to know more about the offering system and delve into all the areas of work that the Kohanim were given, all the areas of authority the Kohanim were given, how we are commanded to minister. The word minister from English actually means work, labor, to labor before the Most High, and how we are supposed to be there for the people of Israel. Okay. There is no place so far that we have that really shows a definition, medically speaking, of tzaraat and betzorah. We have hints about the spiritual value for a person's behavior, for what a person has said, to draw everybody's attention to that behavior at that time. And so with a change of behavior, it is said within 7 days, it would go away. So, there's even the dyeing of wool to red wool to assist in somebody becoming clean versus unclean again. Okay?
Mhm.
There's throwing cedar wood in hyssop and into the red heifer mixture, and using hyssop to sprinkle the resulting waters of lustration. There is a commandment for our people to use cedar wood and hyssop to purify those stricken with these areas. And yet they call it still skin disease. Is there a medical backdrop for putting hyssop on wood, cedar wood, or redwood, and applying it somehow for the person to be purified and be clean again? There's just so much there. There's even a connection with giving your half shekel during Shavuot for the skin problem to go away. Okay? And then it talks about being healed from whatever the skin problem is. If you're healed, then how is being healed a matter of clean and unclean? So, in order to really get into this, there's a need for an in-depth study from one word to another word. Any questions?
Are you referring to Tahor and Tameh?
Yes.
Okay.
But pretty much what we're coming down to is him deciding to use something that could be interpreted medically to bring attention to people's behavior, words, and thoughts regarding where they're at with Torah. It's they segue into several different areas, all dealing with clean and unclean, but it leaves the potential for medical disease behind. And so I'm doing this in a very generalized way because if I attempt to get specific, I don't want anybody to get lost in the shuffle because we're not giving any resolution to this. We're not giving definitions to it. We're only looking at interactions. We're looking at applications. If it manifests itself, if it doesn't manifest itself, and Cohen is the only one who can make the decision of clean and unclean, and yet there's no disobedience involved, and yet the behavior is questioned, but not to the point of whether or not they're sinning. You see the gray area that's being created here.
Uh-huh.
Even if you want to get in concrete terms, you're going to leave the evidence behind in doing so. There's just questions being raised here. Is there a lesser offering or a higher offering? And why is there in such an emphasis on the offerings for this manifestation on the skin called Sara'at and Metzora? Okay.
Hey, Rabbi, is one of the definitions or one of the English terms for one of those? Isn't it called eczema?
They try to say that, but there's not a determination on it in the end.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They want to call it something, they want to connect it to something.
Uh-huh. I was only asking because I was born with eczema. And then I was referencing what you were talking about, and I'm like, okay, well, I was born with it, and I've talked to different like herbalists and stuff, and they're like, well, it was actually caused by a compromised immune system, and it's like, how does that codify with what we're talking about with scripture? But yeah, you know, when you said that they try to put that definition to it as a work. So, all right.
You know, there's not a lot of explanation. If you do have Sara'at or Metzora, then what are you inhibited in doing besides your interaction? And you got to go outside the camp. Okay, that means somebody else has got to feed you while you tag along outside the camp until you are clean again. Okay, so this is truly, as it states, something for the Kohanim to say it's either clean or unclean at certain moments. Then is it for people around to have a witness of something inappropriate in terms of Torah? Or is it more that the person just wouldn't quit doing whatever it was or wouldn't do it better to a point to where they had to bring it to other people's attention without knowing what it was they were looking at? Why was it brought to their attention? What behavior is there? What are they doing wrong or what are they doing too much of? It really draws attention to the individual without there being anything to show why the suspicion is there for anything other than the skin problem itself. There's nothing revealed about what sin is it? What have they disobeyed in? What part of Torah have they put on the side, so to speak? And so these explanations are not given, okay? And they even connect the use of the word soul as nefesh. A man becomes a living being, a living soul. It takes a combination of spirit being of light with a house in order for that to be defined as soul. So they would be saying nefesh, living creature itself, is a soul. So then they are trying to connect that to the kind of meal offering that was used by a poor man. And the Most High count that as if the poor man had offered his own soul. So there's no connection here with this reference point between clean and unclean or the manifestation of it on the skin. So they got several tangents of explanations that are used, but they don't have a lot of bearing on it, and it's not definitive where we can say, okay, this is where we're at for this. And the only way to really explain it, and I'm not doing that today, is because we haven't gone in depth enough in studying the offering system and studying how atonement works and how forgiveness works for there to be a need for this skin manifestation for it to be called clean and unclean. Where does that play in atonement? Where does that play in forgiveness? Because there's no place in there where it says clean and unclean amounts to a sinful problem. And the only reason you need forgiveness is if you transgressed or disobeyed Torah, because the definition of sin is transgression or disobedience to teachings, instruction, direction.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be guilt, because the only reason we use atonement for people is to atone for the guilt.
Mm-hmm.
The definition of guilt is that which is worthy of execution or death. There's nothing that shows that being unclean is worthy of execution or death. And yet they haven't transgressed Torah or just been disobedient to Torah. So there's no need for atonement, no need for forgiveness. On this basis and this premise, that brings us back to clean and unclean. If it doesn't have spiritual value, then how can you attach a ritual value to it when there's no place to go to understand it better, medically or intrinsically, anything else in culture, to show that there's been a violation or more, even a basic cultural standing. And so it's embedded in dealing with the offering system. And the only other places we can go in dealing with the offering system, besides the classes of offering, are the various types and kinds and classes of prayer and praise. Because it teaches in the prophets that not only can you give an offering of animals, agricultural benefit, and not only can you give an offering of wages and profits and earnings and money, but you can give an offering of prayer of different kinds. You can give an offering of types of praise. But there's not an association there with the clean and unclean, with the Sada'at, and with the Masorah, equally to provide a premise even for prayer and praise. The only other area that we can turn to genuinely is how can we use clean and unclean as part of the methodology and premise that we have in place to draw closer to the Most High. How would this maybe inhibit us from drawing closer in a Korban, and how we associate drawing nearer to Him with our offerings? And so we need to be able to approach this once you have a much deeper understanding, a better understanding of the offering system and how to work with these different areas of the offering system. Forgiveness and atonement started with the offering system. Clean and unclean started with the offering system. Okay? And so we have to look at all of these things. And so if it started with the offering system, what have people forgotten? What has fallen to the wayside to where the only thing we have to do with it anymore is a Torah lesson? Is clean and unclean being lived today? In rabbinical Judaism, they say because we don't have a temple, because we don't have the ashes of the red heifer, we can't do clean and unclean. But clean and unclean with the red heifer only applied to coming in contact with the corpse. Every other area of clean and unclean, you can take a bath after sunset and be clean and wash your clothes. We can remedy it, but it's still only the Kohanim, the sons of Aharon, who can determine clean and unclean. Do you determine clean and unclean based on a person's behavior, based on a person's speech, based in whether they've been disobedient and they've sinned? There's not a need for atonement and forgiveness unless that happens. So you can't apply forgiveness and atonement to clean and unclean. And I'm not trying to just be repetitious. I just want to make sure you see where there's an association and where there isn't. Is this coming together at all? If we're to have a go ahead.
But he mentions, the evil speech and everything here. So, and then to say clean, I guess, with evil speech is like disobedience.
Evil speech
You're speaking.
does not provide a premise for a person to be declared unclean.
Okay.
It's just that these are things that were spoken as possible reasons or causes for the unclean, whether it's not an ad or the Metzora. But we don't have a premise for it, even though it was mentioned by our sages or commentators. We know that the Torah says you should not have Lashon Hora. You should not be involved in complaining, guguso, or any of the other words for it that are foreign to most people. Okay? You have an idea that somewhere dealing with clean and unclean without there being sin, if you get to where you are completely clean, you might be able to jump into paradise. But we don't have any premise for that in scripture with any rationale. And so I'm just sharing with you, there's a lot that's been mentioned about it, but there's not a lot that established a premise with it that we can work with based in scripture. And then they ask the question, when there's a plague of leprosy in a house that's in the land of your possession, is it good news that the plagues have come upon them? Did that keep something else from being? And so there's discussion, but there's no resolution. And so rather than bringing these things down a lot, when there's no resolution, it's kind of like analysis paralysis. You begin to analyze things, but you don't come to a resolution. You don't come to a result and answer. And all you're doing is going back and forth in some type of analysis where you get paralyzed by the analysis itself. And there's no resolution. Has any of this come together? So until we're to a point of understanding in the offering system to where we can study this to a greater degree, I don't want you to be more confused. I just want you to understand on this level of the parashah study, okay, there's not enough there for any resolution to give us any understanding for how we should be using this information and how you would expect the Cohen to be dealing with a person based on this information. So at the moment, the question that I brought up to the rabbis is, how does this Parashah study on this level, how does it profit any of our people? We can all say all praise to the Most High at the end of the lesson, but how is it going to make a difference in our lifestyle? How is it going to make a difference in our understanding? How are we going to apply it in our lifestyle or anybody else's lifestyle? We can't say they're sin. We can't produce anything with a premise to where we can say with any assurity, we know what's going on. Does this make any sense? If you take all of the statements that have been made concerning clean and unclean and all of the different passages, it doesn't bring you any closer to any resolution for understanding clean and unclean manifesting itself for the Kohen to declare it so one way or the other. I don't know, have I helped anybody at all? Or am I confused even more?
So are you saying that, like you said before, in respect to the forefathers, their understanding and their knowledge of what was clearer or whatever to them than it is to us, or they were closer, they had a closer relationship with the Most High and more desirous of that than we are today.
Is that the end of your question?
Yeah, that's the end of my question.
I was just waiting.
That's okay.
It's obvious that some of the understanding that was there has either been left behind or hidden in one way or the other, or nobody wants to discuss it. I have asked other Kohanim, I've asked other rabbis, and only 2 or 3 of the Kohanim have offered anything in substance. And for me to share what they've offered, we have to study the offering system in a little bit more depth. So I'm not going to say you can't understand. I'm not going to say you can't have the understanding. I'm not going to say you can't learn. But we have to build a little bit more of a premise than we have so far.
Right.
I'd be happy to address it again. I'm not saying it's beyond your reach, beyond your understanding, but there's not enough been presented in this parashah so that we can arrive at a resolution and a better understanding.
Right, because well, to me, the only other option is like, okay, why is it in the, why, if it's not relevant, if it's something that goes nowhere, or seemingly goes nowhere based on understanding, then why is it even in there? And it wouldn't be in there if it wasn't.
I can agree with your statement. However, we still are no closer with that statement to a result.
Right. So, yeah.
And so the purpose of me approaching it this way is in regard to the Most High himself being completely results oriented. And we know that by his statement that he's able to see the end from the beginning. But with the way this parashah is, the way it's put together, we are unable to see the end from the beginning. And it gets to be worse than the dog chasing his tail. So we have to delve deeper into a better understanding of the offering system.
Okay.
Okay. And the reason for that is because clean and unclean has relevancy within the offering system. It has relevancy within behavior. It has relevancy within interaction. It has relevancy with how the Most High receives our prayers and our praise. However, that relevancy is still a mystery until we understand this offering system a little bit more.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
So this is like a coming up higher step.
Higher step? Okay.
Well, I mean,
If you're
the more
taught
you
to
know, the more you're responsible for it.
well, if you understand addition, subtraction, but you have not been taught multiplication and division, how do you handle groups, units of different things?
Mhm.
Okay. And then if you have an understanding of multiplication and division, then you want to turn to the basis of algebra. And once you have that, then you're armed enough to approach geometry, trigonometry. Then you've got enough to approach calculus.
Mhm.
Okay. And so what kind of a calculus do you get into with all of these tools? Okay. And then you've got chemistry. Does chemistry have anything to do with math? Yeah.
Quite a
But
bit.
if you're dealing with chemistry, then aside from math being tools that you use to understand chemistry, what do you do with chemistry? Okay. Is mathematics the language of chemistry that gives you understanding? We don't have that language to understand, okay, the design of clean and unclean. And we especially don't have the tools that math would give us or anything else right this moment for understanding Saraat and Metzora within the climate of our people's culture and traditions, and how it makes changes with those things.
So I have a
Anybody else have anything?
Yep. So where do you recommend that we start studying? We need to understand more about the offering system. Start studying Hebrew so we can understand the passages.
We can study Hebrew in pieces, or we can study it, as a total language. But to understand the operating system, we really have to start all over again at times with the Michigan, with the rulings in different areas of Torah that they call the law governing the different classes of offerings, the different kinds of offerings, whether it's agricultural, meal, whether it's libation, whether it's animal slaughtering, the predisposition of the owner of the offering, and how we deal with the offering itself, the predisposition of the Kohen, and what is happening with him in the process of getting that offering ready to be offered. And from one day to the next, who would they bring one offering or another offering? In order for us to understand these things, okay, the Most High in Torah, you notice there's a lot of "and he said," and so this is actually being put into place by the Most High. And the only thing that we're sure of is why we have to have Saraat and Metzora, why we need clean and unclean, is so that we can go and study in a discovery process of the layers or the different places of set apartness. That is probably where he's going to lead us to. For example, if somebody brings an offering to the Cohen accepts it, the Cohen puts it on the altar, okay? The person receives his atonement, he receives his blessing, he asks for forgiveness and receives it. Is there anything in that process where clean and unclean is discussed? So we have a different area to study with clean and unclean than we have with the mainstream portion of the offering system, where you don't need to give an offering unless you violated Torah. And then there's sin. So the only closer way that I can tell you, the only way we can discuss clean and unclean is while you're within Torah observance and you're not having to receive forgiveness and atonement because you're Torah observant and you're obedient, then we have to start discussing the levels of set apartness, and that's where clean and unclean is actually going to come in.
Mm.
Does that help you with an answer to your question, Michael?
A little, thank you.
Even in the Brit Hadashah, Yeshua touched on clean and unclean, but he did it from a different perspective. He did not say that it's no longer reverent to receive atonement. He didn't say you shouldn't go see the priest. He didn't say he was the only one. You got to only get forgiveness from him. Because whenever he was asked by a Torah scholar, we all know that only the Most High can forgive sin. By what authority are you forgiving sin? So they didn't say, are you individually able to forgive sin? They said, by what authority are you forgiving sin? They did not take away forgiveness of sin as the domain of the Most High. They were looking for the connection between him and the Most High, asking what his authority was, where did he get the authority from to forgive sin, since only the Most High can forgive sin. Okay? And in different places, he dealt with clean and unclean. Okay? And in all places, clean and unclean, Sara'ed and Metzora, all deal with bringing attention to an individual and bringing attention from that individual to introspection and self-inspection of the person, doing the looking at the person clean or unclean, dealing with Sara'ed or Metzora. Not even counting when you have the Sara'ed or Metzora in a house or on a wall or anything else, and its purpose in being manifested. So all in all avenues bring us that Sara'ed and Metzora, clean and unclean, have to do with getting more and more set apart. Am I helped or confused?
No, you helped me.
It can really cause people to jump to conclusions. It can cause people confusion because of the potential statements that are made by sages and commentators and people supposedly in the know. But if you're only looking at what's being posited, what's being presented within the offering system, we got to look with what is being done there, what has benefited the people, because without the offering system, the Kohanim could not fulfill the commands of the Most High to them, saying, minister to me, serve people. To minister to the Most High means you have to labor before the people, because ministry means labor by definition. How are you going to labor before the Most High except in depth with the way that you serve the people? The ways that we're given to serve the people are with the offering system, with judging, with Torah teaching, and with making sure that our people Israel are whole. So we don't have an understanding of the commandments given to the Kohanim. We won't have an understanding of how the offering system is approached, either from within the Mishkan and the Ohel or within the temple. And how do they relate to each other? Are they separate from each other? That these things have to be brought out in a more clear fashion. Everybody with me? Or have I helped or hurt?
Mhm.
It's inappropriate to try to purpose something for the basis of, I've got to do something with this, and then you make a misconnection, you misinterpret because you're trying so hard to make a connection, whereas there's not a connection between clean and unclean with sin. There's not a connection between clean and unclean with forgiveness and atonement. They're all a part of the offering system. They're all a part of what the anointed one was supposed to be taking care of and helping the people to be more whole, but they're not the same thing. They can't be laid off on one another. If one is unclean, one cannot approach Torah. If one is unclean, one cannot be among the people. But a woman with her monthly nadah is not sinful. She's just set apart away from the people. Clean and unclean keeps you set apart away from the people. But that doesn't mean that you can't be before the Most High. When you're sinful, you break faith with the Most High and you incur guilt. But unclean does not keep you, does not put you in other than right standing with the Most High. You can still be in right standing with the Most High being unclean. So it does not stop you from getting before the Most High. Is this making sense at all? So, Baruch Hashem, Shabbat Shalom.
Well, the most.
Now, there is only one.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
It's okay. I'll do
I
it
said
later.
there's only one thing that I haven't discussed, and I really want to stay away from it. There's an element of area of study that talks about Israel's deliverance, okay, within the framework of Torah and Torah observance. Now, there is a scripture that does state that the house of Yaakov is meant for destruction, the house of Israel for abuse. And so there is not much given to that. So you have to put that together with other framework, which is what I wanted to do in a generalized study within a period of a few hours. We might yet get to that. Okay. Now, all of Israel knows, all of the scholars know, all of the rabbis know, even though they won't publicly discuss it, that Israel yet, their deliverance comes with the anointed one. Okay? In what they call a messianic era. Okay? For them to say that Israel needs a deliverance is their only hint that they're going to give for the need for the anointed one, Mashiach. Because all through the Red Hadashah, the New Testament, when there are questions asked either of Yeshua's followers or of himself, they never asked him, are you the divine salvation? Okay, they always ask, are you Mashiach? Are you the anointed one? Okay, even in the King James, they ask, are you the Christos from the Greek? Okay. Everybody was familiar with salvation because they knew that salvation was a vehicle. They knew it was the game changer to get you to the Mashiach, the anointed one. And the anointed one was going to ensure that everything else happened. Because it took them in-depth study of the prophets and the writings to come to that. And Rav Shaul was considered the most studious of all the studied people there were. And his writings in the Brit Hadashah have been the most influential and the most misunderstood. And that's entirely another area where we need to study to understand what he was really teaching there based on a Torah point of view. Because Rav Shaul taught based on Torah observance and based on the offering system, because they go hand in hand. So he taught based on these things. He never taught to be set free from Torah. He never, the teachings, instruction, direction. He never taught to be set free from an offering system. What he did teach was if you can do one, how wondrous and beautiful will it be to do the next thing? Okay? How can you understand the wonder and mystery of Mashiach if you don't understand the offering system and your Torah observance? But it was interwoven all through Torah, all through the prophets. So those are worthwhile studies that we'll do. My question still remains, have I helped or have I confused more?
You've inspired me.
Oh, okay.
I'm intrigued by it.
Okay. So I'm giving you a different perspective.
Yeah.
The Most High has said, be set apart, for I am set apart.
Right.
Yes.
That makes this whole discussion or this whole subject very relevant to us.
Mhm.
And
okay. Say again?
And attainable.
Attainable. Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Well,
available.
the most important part.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. Got anything, Mark?
Helpful for me.
Okay. All right. Like your hat, by the way.
Thank you.
You were going to comment on something, Hannah?
Now, I understand more so that the clean and unclean was again for bonding us. It was taking us closer to him. You know, there's times when we make actions or things happen that take us draw us away from him. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was a state of disobedience. It was a state of not being able to be close to him during that time. So, okay. Again, I get what you said about the offerings.
Okay. Well, Michael, if you'll stop recording, I'll make another couple of comments.